Alexei Makarov vanished without a trace, leaving behind a trail of encrypted treaties and a web of lies that would shake the world. Isabel Gray, the sharp MI6 analyst, thought she had uncovered the truth, but the deeper she dug, the more she realized that nothing was what it seemed. Jacob Bennett, the CIA cybersecurity expert, cracked the code that linked the treaties to Project Scarecrow, but it was too late. Key players like Rafael Alvarez and Daria Volkova were already disappearing, their fates tangled in a conspiracy that no one could fully understand. As the clock ticked down, Mason Cole, the ex-Navy officer turned private contractor, was hired to track the missing, but what he discovered could ignite a global conflict. Now the question isn't just who leaked the treaty, it's who's controlling the chaos and what's coming next. In early spring, an encrypted folder was discovered on a darknet server that U.S. cyber intelligence routinely monitored. At first, it seemed like just another dump, anonymous, untraceable, probably fake. But this time, something felt different. Inside the folder was a single document. No passwords, no hidden traps, just a PDF file with a bold red insignia stamped at the top, the double-headed eagle of the Russian Federation. The language was clean, bureaucratic, unmistakably official. Analysts reading it in the Pentagon couldn't believe what they were seeing. The document outlined a covert agreement between Russia and an unnamed third party, allegedly Israel. Its contents were shocking. It claimed that in the event of a military strike by Israel on Iranian nuclear infrastructure, Russia would not intervene. There would be no military retaliation, no public condemnation, just silence. The implications were staggering. For years, Russia had postured as Iran's informal protector in the Middle East. Though the alliance was never written in stone, Russian forces had supported Iranian interests in Syria and had maintained close diplomatic ties. To suggest that Moscow would now simply step aside while Israel attacked Iran's core defenses was unthinkable. Within hours of the discovery, top-level security briefings were underway across Washington. Intelligence officials, military leaders, and foreign policy experts debated whether the document was real or a sophisticated forgery. Every word was picked apart, every date cross-checked. The language was precise but deliberately vague. No names, no direct signatures, just initials and coded terms that suggested authenticity without confirming it. The leak was never made public, but within days it had spread like wildfire through closed intelligence networks. NATO allies began asking quiet questions. Israel remained silent. Iran issued a vague warning about external actors playing with fire, but did not reference the document. Russia, uncharacteristically, said nothing. No denial, no outrage, just a vacuum of silence. That silence was what frightened U.S. officials the most. If the treaty was fake, why wasn't Russia pushing back? And if it was real, why would it be leaked now? The more they dug, the more questions emerged. The document's metadata pointed to Eastern Europe, possibly Belarus. But the trail was cold and oddly clean, as if it had been deliberately scrubbed. Someone wanted this treaty found, but no one knew who or why. And that's when the real investigation began, as news of the leaked treaty continued to ripple through. Classified circles, an unsettling quiet took hold. Analysts expected chaos, at least a public denial, some diplomatic outcry, or a strategic military response. Instead, there was silence. Neither Russia nor Israel acknowledged the existence of the document. Iran made no direct accusations. Behind the scenes, however, Washington was in a frenzy. Intelligence agencies began running background checks on every known diplomatic and military exchange between the three nations over the past year. What they found didn't bring clarity, it only deepened the mystery. Months before the leak, there had been subtle shifts. Russian naval activity in the Mediterranean had dropped significantly. Iranian military shipments once escorted by Russian aircraft had suddenly lost their protective cover. Israeli reconnaissance flights near Syrian airspace had gone unchallenged. At the time, these moves were seen as tactical repositioning. Now, they took on a more ominous meaning. Each piece suggested quiet coordination, silent signals that something was in motion just beneath the surface. U.S. officials began pressing their Israeli counterparts through back channels, but all inquiries were met with diplomatic vagueness. There were no denials, no confirmations, just evasive answers and polite deflections. Some believed Israel was caught off guard too. Others weren't so sure. The idea that such a sensitive agreement could exist without Israel's full knowledge seemed unlikely. But if Israel was involved, and Russia truly had agreed to stand down, it raised a critical question. What did Russia gain in return? A theory began to take shape within the CIA's Strategic Analysis Unit. What if the leak wasn't a breach, but a delivery? What if someone wanted this document to be found at this specific time? If so, the timing was deliberate. The Middle East was already on edge. Iran had accelerated uranium enrichment, and Israeli rhetoric had grown more aggressive. One wrong move could set off a regional conflict. And this document, whether real or fake, was a match dangling over dry tinder. At the same time, another pattern was emerging. A cluster of social media accounts, mostly anonymous and recently created, began referencing the treaty in vague terms. These weren't regular conspiracy theorists. Their language was polished, their timing coordinated. Intelligence flagged them as possible bots, or worse, trained operatives spreading a controlled narrative. It was now clear, the treaty wasn't just a document, it was a message. But who was the sender, and what was the purpose? Metadata embedded in the leaked treaty pointed investigators to a single geographic location, an IP address in Belarus, traced back to an abandoned Soviet-era military compound near the outskirts of Gomel. Once a facility for electronic surveillance and psychological operations, the site had officially been decommissioned decades earlier. But satellite imagery told a different story. In the months before the leak, there had been unusual activity. Supply trucks coming and going at odd hours, power grid fluctuations, and what looked like recent construction. The place was no longer dead. Someone had brought it back to life. Black Ops team from a NATO-aligned agency deployed a surveillance drone over the area. What they found was unnerving. The buildings were completely empty, stripped of equipment and even wiring. Chairs and desks sat overturned, as if the occupants had fled in a hurry. Thermal scans picked up no body heat, no electronics, no signs of movement. The site had been evacuated within days of the treaty's appearance online, suggesting the leak wasn't just an accident. It was part of a carefully timed exit strategy. Further investigation revealed that the compound had recently been leased. Not to a government entity, but to a shell company based in Cyprus, with financial ties to a Russian private military contractor known for disinformation campaigns. The company's CEO was a former GRU officer, now operating under a new name. Suddenly, a larger theory began to form. The facility hadn't just been used to create the document. It was the center of a broader intelligence operation, designed not to reveal secrets but to manipulate them. The theory gained traction when analysts dug into the site's history. During the Cold War, this very compound had served as a base for Operation Mirage, a Soviet-era project specializing in psychological disruption. Their specialty, planting false information so believable that even those who discovered it wouldn't know what to trust. The parallels were undeniable. Could the treaty be the modern version of a mirage tactic, an information weapon masquerading as a leaked truth? If so, then the treaty was never about Israel or Iran. It was about confusion, pressure, and misdirection. A chess move to force the United States and its allies into a reactive state. But if that was the goal, it raised a terrifying question. What was the next move? Because if this was step one, the real danger hadn't even started. Just as intelligence agencies began to piece together the origins of the treaty, news broke that sent a shockwave through every secure channel in the Western world. Alexei Makarov, a former GRU strategist and one of the few individuals capable of authoring a document of such precision and influence, had vanished. He had been under quiet surveillance by European intelligence ever since retiring, under suspicious circumstances, and moving between safe houses across Eastern Europe. Days before his disappearance, Makarov had traveled to Istanbul using a forged Moldovan passport. It was there, in a luxury hotel near the Bosphorus, that he was last seen. CCTV footage showed him checking in, dressed like a tourist, carrying a single suitcase. But after that, nothing. No footage of him leaving. No record of checkout. His room was discovered days later after cleaning staff reported a foul odor. Strangely, the room was spotless. No signs of struggle, no signs of departure. His personal belongings were still there. Passport, wallet, clothes. The only thing missing was the suitcase. Turkish authorities opened an investigation, but within hours the case was pulled into a deeper intelligence black hole. Western operatives arrived and took control of the scene. What they found hidden inside the room's safe would change everything. A flash drive, encrypted but eventually cracked, contained a second version of the same treaty. But this one painted a completely different picture. In this new document, Russia vowed to defend Iran with all necessary force if Israel initiated a strike. The language was just as polished, the formatting identical, even the digital signatures matched. Side by side, the two documents told opposite stories. Both looked genuine. Both couldn't be true. The question now was, which one came first? And who had written which? Analysts were thrown into disarray. Some believed Makarov was running a rogue operation, creating confusion between states for a private client. Others suspected he had gone dark willingly, part of a wider plan to make every version of the truth equally unbelievable. But one thing was clear. His disappearance wasn't random. It was strategic. Whether he had been silenced, kidnapped, or had vanished on his own, Makarov had become the central figure in a game that no one fully understood. And somewhere out there, a suitcase filled with secrets was either already in the wrong hands, or waiting to be found. As the two conflicting versions of the treaty circulated through the intelligence world, a chilling realization began to settle in. Both documents were convincing, and both had seemingly airtight authenticity. Every detail, from the digital signatures to the bureaucratic formatting, aligned perfectly with known Russian communication protocols. Experts in document forensics were called in from multiple allied countries, and yet no one could determine which version, if any, was the original. Each file had its own metadata, each pointing to different upload locations and timestamps, yet both had traces of being processed on the same classified Russian operating system used exclusively by high-ranking military intelligence. Theories multiplied. Some believed the documents were part of a layered deception, designed not to deceive enemies but to confuse allies. Others suggested they were prototypes from an active operation, meant to be selectively leaked depending on the geopolitical need. But the deeper analysts dug, the stranger the case became. A third version of the treaty surfaced, found by German cyber analysts in a cache of data recovered from a compromised Iranian server. This one was even more ambiguous, stating only that Russia would act in accordance with its own regional interests if a conflict erupted between Israel and Iran. Again, the signature was flawless. Again, it couldn't be definitively placed. It was no longer just a question of which treaty was real. Now, the question was whether reality itself was being manipulated. A disinformation strategy this advanced required more than hackers. It needed strategists, linguists, cultural experts, and the kind of long-game planning associated with Cold War psychological operations. This wasn't just espionage. It was the deliberate creation of uncertainty. A state-sponsored fog of war, where every actor was forced to guess. As confusion spread, even high-level officials began to second-guess their own intelligence. Briefings contradicted each other. Allies questioned the U.S. interpretation. Diplomats found themselves unable to take firm positions. And through it all, Russia maintained absolute silence. No denials, no confirmations, just the quiet power of ambiguity. Some intelligence officers began referring to the situation as a digital ghost war, a conflict without weapons, fought through whispers, leaks, and shadows. In this new kind of warfare, the truth wasn't just hidden, it was weaponized. And as more versions of the treaty continued to surface, it became clear that someone was pulling the strings with surgical precision. But for what purpose? No one yet knew. Weeks after the third version of the treaty emerged, tensions in the Middle East reached a breaking point. Iranian officials announced they had completed installation of advanced centrifuges deep inside a fortified facility near Isfahan, claiming the right to pursue nuclear development for peaceful purposes. But satellite imagery suggested otherwise. Activity around the site was consistent with weapons-grade enrichment. Israeli intelligence had reportedly been tracking the development for months. Now, with the ambiguity surrounding Russia's position growing deeper, Israel saw a window. In the early hours of a quiet Tuesday, Israeli fighter jets launched a precision strike on the Isfahan facility. The world watched in disbelief. It was a bold move, one that under normal circumstances might have triggered swift retaliation or even full-scale war. But this time, there was an unexpected reaction. None at all. Iran issued a strongly worded condemnation but did not launch a counterattack. Russia, in an even more stunning development, remained silent. No statements from the Kremlin, no emergency sessions at the UN, no military posturing. Just silence. Inside intelligence war rooms, across the globe, analysts scrambled to make sense of it. Had the original treaty been real after all? Had Israel acted on privileged knowledge that Russia wouldn't respond? Or was this a test, meant to probe Russia's true position, to see whether the silence in the documents would translate into silence on the battlefield? As the dust settled, new questions emerged. Surveillance of Russian airbases in Syria showed no increase in activity. Russian naval movements in the Caspian Sea remained routine, and Russian state media avoided the topic entirely. The strike had happened, and the world had held its breath. But now, it seemed, nothing would follow. Behind closed doors, Israeli officials were reportedly both relieved and uneasy. The silence was more unnerving than outrage. It suggested that the treaty, or at least some form of understanding, might have been real, but it also hinted at something deeper, something strategic. If Russia was choosing not to respond, it wasn't out of weakness. It was because it suited their larger goal. And as global powers tried to process the implications, another truth came into focus. The game had moved beyond diplomacy or deterrence. It had entered a phase where silence itself had become a weapon, a calculated absence, one that kept everyone guessing and left no one in control. Just as world powers tried to adjust to Russia's chilling silence after the Israeli strike, a new player entered the scene. A mysterious figure known only by the alias The Archivist began reaching out to a small group of investigative journalists across Europe and North America. The messages were encrypted, routed through multiple dark web nodes, and accompanied by documents no one else had seen. The archivist claimed to have worked on a joint Russian-Belarusian project linked to the original treaty leak. Their message was clear. The document was real, but not in the way anyone expected. The archivist revealed that the treaty was only one part of a larger framework, designed not to protect or expose military plans, but to influence how nations reacted to perceived threats. According to the files provided, the original treaty and its forged counterparts were all tools in a broader psychological operation referred to as truth conditioning. The strategy relied on overwhelming global intelligence networks with conflicting data, gradually eroding trust in any single version of events. But what caught the attention of the CIA wasn't just the information, it was the inclusion of a cipher. Hidden in the footnotes of each treaty was a string of seemingly random characters. When pieced together across the various versions, the characters formed a pattern, not words, but coordinates, timestamps, and binary sequences. The cipher led to an encrypted archive stored on a secure server in Kazakhstan. After weeks of decoding, what emerged was a log of communications between unknown Russian operatives, discussing not only the treaties, but also their impact assessments in real time. These logs described how various intelligence agencies reacted to each leak, how diplomatic responses were being tracked, and how media narratives shifted with every version released. It was a control system, part surveillance, part feedback loop. Russia wasn't just watching, it was learning, adapting, refining. And the ultimate goal wasn't to start a war. It was to make war planning impossible. The archivist's documents revealed the terrifying elegance of the plan. If no one could trust what was real, Every military move would be second-guessed. Allies would argue. Enemies would hesitate. Decision-making would freeze under the weight of uncertainty. In a world where the truth was always in question, whoever controlled the confusion held the real power. And someone was doing just that, with surgical precision. As the decrypted logs from the archivist's cipher were reviewed, one phrase kept appearing again and again in the communications: Project Scarecrow. At first, no one knew what it meant. It wasn't a codename that appeared in any known Russian military database, nor was it referenced in declassified Cold War files. But eventually, a retired algorithms tracked real-time reactions on social media, in diplomatic briefings, and in military deployments. The better the world responded, the smarter Scarecrow became. By the time global intelligence agencies realized what was happening, the damage was already spreading. Alliances were being tested. Public trust in institutions was eroding. Even within individual governments, leaders were beginning to question their own intelligence channels. The war wasn't being fought with weapons. It was being fought with confusion. And the scariest part of all? Project Scarecrow didn't need to be right. It only needed to be believed. As the days passed, it became clear that the consequences of the treaty leak were more profound than anyone could have imagined. The intelligence community began to notice an unsettling pattern. Several key players connected to the investigation were disappearing. First, it was a low-level intelligence analyst based in London who had been part of a team investigating the metadata of the documents. He had been due to testify before a special Senate committee, but the morning he was set to appear, his apartment was found empty. No signs of forced entry, no trace of his personal belongings, nothing. Just a cold room and an open window. Then came the disappearance of a prominent cybersecurity expert in Berlin, someone who had been crucial in tracing the origins of the leaks. She had been working late one night, reviewing the final strands of data connected to the Russian military compound in Belarus. By morning, she was gone. Her colleagues found her phone, but there were no clues as to where she had gone or why. No ransom notes, no warning, just silence. As these disappearances stacked up, the situation began to look eerily coordinated. The missing individuals were all connected to different aspects of the investigation. Some had expertise in cyber forensics. Others were diplomatic analysts who had helped verify the authenticity of the treaties. The one common thread was their knowledge of Project Scarecrow and its far-reaching implications. The timing was too perfect to be mere coincidence. Someone was cleaning up loose ends. Rumors began circulating that high-ranking government officials were already taking steps to distance themselves from the investigation, fearing that they too might be in the crosshairs. The pressure was mounting. If the treaty was part of a larger disinformation campaign, then whoever was behind it had resources and connections far beyond what anyone had anticipated. These were not random leaks. This was a carefully orchestrated plot designed to sow chaos, and anyone who dug too deep seemed to vanish. In the wake of these unsettling disappearances, the investigation stalled. The trail had gone cold. It seemed like the more the intelligence community tried to uncover, the more elusive the truth became. The missing individuals were presumed dead, but there was no evidence to support that. No bodies, no trace. Just the same chilling absence that had greeted every attempt to uncover the real story behind the treaty. And with each new disappearance, the question remained: was someone trying to hide the truth? Or was there something far darker at play, a trap set to ensnare anyone brave enough to expose it? As the investigation continued to unravel, a final unexpected development shocked even the most seasoned intelligence officers. A fourth version of the treaty surfaced. This version, unlike the others, was not discovered on the dark web or in encrypted databases. It was found in a remote corner of the Russian Arctic. A research station, isolated from the world, had received an anonymous package containing a USB drive. When the station's researchers plugged it into their system, they found not only the treaty but a full dossier on the entire Project Scarecrow operation. The files were accompanied by a message: "The truth is buried. Find it before it finds you." The files were extensive, detailing a complex web of disinformation tactics, covert operations, and the identities of operatives stationed across the globe. But the most startling discovery was the last file, a recording. The file contained a voice recording, encrypted with multiple layers of security. After painstaking decryption, it became clear. The voice was that of Alexei Makarov, the former GRU officer who had vanished months earlier. In the recording, Makarov spoke of the true purpose of Project Scarecrow. It was not merely to cause confusion. It was designed to destabilize global decision-making processes so thoroughly that no single nation or alliance could act with certainty. He described how each disappearance, each leak, and each contradictory piece of intelligence was carefully planned to fracture the resolve of nations, to turn them against each other, and to create a vacuum of leadership. It was, in essence, a war for influence, not through guns or bombs, but through the manipulation of perception and trust.